Mr. Coppola, you made some years ago, sorry, yeah. When you made Apocalypse Now, you gave us a very tight view of what happened in Vietnam. Did you think in making something about Iraq or something like that?
You know, people have asked me that, and if I were to make a film in Iraq, it would be a very peaceful film, because I no longer believe that you make an anti-war film by showing explosions and people getting shot. I would make a story taking place in Iraq of a family, and the guy wanted to have money for his daughter to get married, and nothing terrible happened to them, and at the end of it, they thank God that they had their family. I mean, I don't think I would make a war film again because I would make it in as peaceful. I think to be a real anti-war film, it has to be filled with peace, and violence is exciting. That's why all the movies you go see are always very violent, you know, because audiences are stimulated. But to really make an anti-war, you wouldn't want to make a film about war unless it was an anti-war film. And I now question whether films that glorify violence and make violence exciting are really anti-war films. So it would have to be a very peaceful film. I would like to do that, actually. I'd love to make a beautiful, peaceful film in the middle of a war and have no one get killed. Well, yeah, no, I still feel that, you know, the cinema is moving into its electronic or digital era, and that means that equipment, which in my era, for a young filmmaker, was always trying to get equipment, trying to get editing equipment. Now, you no longer have that problem because you can borrow a camera, you can edit on your computer. And certainly the cinema is now in your hands. You can go out and make a movie. I feel those of you who are serious about being filmmakers would be wise to spend a little time, you'll laugh at me for saying this, but to spend a little time working with one-act plays, which is a theater form. And a one-act play, why do I feel that? It's because all you need is a few actors and a place, and then you have the opportunity to work with writing and acting and an audience, the three elements that are so important. When you make a film right away, you spend a lot of time editing, and by the time you show it to an audience, months have gone by, and I think especially for a young person or a beginning person, the one-act play, there are many wonderful one-act plays. Most playwrights who wrote long plays wrote many one-act plays, and it's a fabulous way to begin to learn how to work with actors, because acting is an area that is little understood even by professional directors. And those of you who have worked in theater or who have worked with actors can get that opportunity. The camera is very exciting to make images, but ultimately cinema is writing and acting, told by pictures. But you know, so that would be my recommendation. I'm not sure, is that what you wanted me to talk more about the technology?
Yes.
Well, I mean, this film was shot digitally. It was shot with very excellent lenses. The lens is the most important part of the camera. And whether the camera has film or a digital imager, it's the lens and of course the talent of the cinematographer. So, you know, it's sad to say goodbye to film, because film is so beautiful and has served us for, you know, 100 years. But now we are moving in to a new era, and the new era brings with it some very exciting possibilities that could only happen in an electronic medium. I believe that every one of you is clearly a unique human being, individual. There's no one else like each of you. the story of your becoming born and growing and everything. Each one is a fantastic story. So if you're going to make films, and you make films that have a personal content in it, that you're deliberately trying to make films that you can use your personal story to make, then those films are going to be totally unique and individual because you are. So I always, for example, advised my kids that when you make a film, even though it might be a story about some fantasy thing or a Western or whatever it is, find something you can consider personal about it, so you attach yourself on that basis. In winemaking, they call that terroir. That's that the grapes are grown in a piece of land, and you can drink the wine and know where it's from. And you know, I believe my daughter's films, that if you see one of her films, even if you were to see 3 minutes of it without knowing what it was, you'll know it's her film. And I try myself to personalize everything, you know. There was even a time when I had to make, I was really in debt because I had financed the film and it was not successful, and it took me 10 years to pay the debt back. And so I had to do a lot of, in fact, I had to do any film I could get. But each time I did one of those films, I tried to fall in love with something about it. It's a little bit like being, a terrible thing to say, but it's a little bit like when you were in that situation being a prostitute, you know. But even as such, you know, you try to fall in love, oh, he has nice hair, or he's sweet, or he has a nice smile, or he's kind, or he's got a good sense of humor. You find something that you can love, because you can't make film without loving it, and to love it, it has to be personal. It has to touch you personally, and so you have to sometimes search for it. Well, I made a film once called Peggy Sue Got Married. This was the period when I needed to make a film every year to pay the debt, and I didn't understand anything about the script that I could write, you know. And then one day I saw I thought of something, and I ran a film based on Thornton Wilder's play called Our Town. Maybe you heard of that play, I don't know. But that play had something about it that reminded me of Peggy Sue Got Married, and I said, now I see, I understand how to do it. So sometimes you really, you know, you have to find something, and then it becomes personal to you. But I don't think you can make a film. I couldn't make a film if I didn't in some way love it, you know. You know, the thing about shooting digitally is that you can see what you're getting right away, so you do work a little bit faster. And since we were very low budget, we didn't have trailers and bathrooms, so we just sat around on the set. But that was good, because since I was sitting around on the set, the actors tended to want to hang around with me because we were always kidding around. And it's wonderful to see the actors when they're not acting, because usually that's when they're very real. So I was always looking at the actors, because the two boys, Vincent and Alden, were really, you know, he was older, Alden was younger, so they were relating just as they were in the story. And I would very often see behavior, and then I said, oh, let's put that in the movie, because that's, you know, that's really, usually when you say action and they start acting, they get more phony. So the secret is to try to have them be as they are with normal behavior. And the fact that it was digital and we were all waiting around the camera right on the set, I think was good. It was different, you know, when normally on a movie, as you know, the actors all go off to trailers and the director goes, and everyone's on the phone talking to their stockbroker or their girlfriend or whoever, and then they have to get them back, and it takes time. But this time they were all more excited to keep working. Yes.
Good evening. Did you find it more difficult to direct Vincent Gallo, considering himself a director?
He was a big help. I found him a real pleasure. His way of working is he likes to be very real, so he doesn't like to do a lot of rehearsal. And we did rehearse for 2 weeks before, but when we're actually there on the set, he doesn't like to, work it out and work it out. He likes to just do one and try to be as real as possible. And he has his philosophy of working. And yeah, as a director, you try to help each actor as best you can. And for example, Vincent has a way of working, and Maribel Verdot, the wife, has her way of working, and it's the opposite. But it was tricky to work the way he wanted to work and work the way she wanted to work when they were both in the same scene. But you try to do that, But actors are becoming very good directors. If you look at all the jobs on a film, writers and editors and photographers, usually it's the actors who the success rate for actors directing, I think, is higher than any other of the professions. And it must be because they understand acting, and acting and how you apply acting to a script, to text is, I always used to say that the two elements of a film, the H2O that make the water, are acting and writing. And if you can bring those two together, then if you have beautiful photography and beautiful art direction and beautiful music, it only makes it better. But you need those two essentials to do it, I think. He's saying if movies are becoming, because of the technology, more malleable, that perhaps then they move closer to jazz. And in a way, you're right. I mean, if you have a group of people there to see a movie, and it's like a jazz. Dave Brubeck may start with da 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 da. Well, that's the script. But then what happens between the people and the other artists and the audience becomes somewhat improvised. In a way, in a funny way, the film director has many components of his films, and he has a lot of pedals, the way guitarists have pedals, and he can give you that film as he feels you want it. So every night it would be. But I mean, I'm sure when Mick Jagger goes on road that the shows they do are very similar one to the other, but not entirely. And that's interesting to me, the idea. I guess what I feel is that, art was always live. People would come to town and they would, minstrels or actors would, did you ever see the movie To Be or Not to Be? You have seen it? It reminds me when the fellow walks out, he's going to see my wife. So that, art was always live, and then when the first reproduced art came, I guess it was the photograph, and then the music roll, and then the Victrola, people were thrilled. I mean, my God, you mean I can hear Caruso? I can give you 25 cents and hear Caruso? I have to do. And then when they put the first bed sheet up and projected a locomotive coming into the room, people couldn't believe it. And so we've had a love affair with reproduced art ever since. But now, if art is so easy to reproduce, if I were to give you a DVD of this movie, there would be 15,000 of them tomorrow all over the world. It's almost negligible, it's almost worthless. It's like I tell the story of how when I was making The Godfather, I bought a calculator, and everyone was looking, my God, you can you 50 plus 75, and that calculator cost $500 in those days. But now, the bank will give you a calculator for nothing. And that's what the DVD has become. It's absolutely negligible. I mean, you should give them away. Students should be able to download their movies for free, because there's no thrill anymore of just totally reproduced art, stamped out. You want something. My granddaughter tells me that when they're opening a new movie, they all go the first night or the second night because it's so exciting. It's like going to a sporting event. They don't know, will the movie be good, will it be bad, we don't know. So people, I think audiences want that excitement from cinema again. and it's become so much a means to make money that it's lost its life, and we have to find, there have to be ways, and possibly what I'm saying or what you're saying is one way, to kind of work against the fact that we're tired of reproduced art. It's too prevalent. Cinema is like a language, and languages change, languages evolve, and so the cinema is about to evolve, but because it's a business, they don't want it to change, so they kind of want it to be like Coca-Cola. They want to give the audience the same Coca-Cola every time, thinking that that will be success, but fine for Coca-Cola, but for movies have to take risks and have to take chances, and the cinema isn't the surefire habit that it used to be, where everyone went to the movie theaters 20, 30 years ago. So I believe that the cinema is going to evolve into another aspect of its language. I think I know what that is, but it's always hard to talk about it because sometimes it makes people sad. Oh, you mean movies are not going to be like we know them always, and it's going to be the new generation, of course, that's going to really do this. I have a lot of crazy theories about that. I won't bore you with them, but there's something about cinema now that it's electronic that never happened before. For a while, we were just editing movies electronically, or we were, of course, recording the sound. And those of you who make films or who have made films know how magical the sound is. Because the sound is all basically digital, you can compose the sound and do all sorts of amazing things with the sound, but because the picture was on film, it was more, you could just cut shot to shot, and you could do effects, but you were limited. Well, now both picture and sound are digital, which means they are married together in a almost virtual state. And it means that you can compose movies for the first time. You're not required to assemble them mechanically. But it means that something else that's very significant, I believe, is that for the first time in history, movies are malleable, which means they exist as a bunch of files in a virtual state. That means they don't have to be the same way every night. And I think that's the future of the cinema, and I leave it at that. I mean, think about it. I could talk a half an hour on this subject, but for the first time, the cinema can be made custom for the audience each night. It requires one thing, though. It requires that the filmmaker be there with the audience, and that sounds very strange. But, in the old days, composers didn't get paid for their music. There was no way, if you were Felix Mendelssohn, that you would get money because you wrote the music. Of course, he was rich, so it didn't matter. But in order for a composer to get money, he had to go with the orchestra and conduct it to get a salary as a musician. That's how he got money. So I foresee a cinema in which the filmmaker is present with the audience, and that the film is made custom for them each night, being a malleable experience. It's sort of something closer to what theater used to be, what entertainment used to be, and art used to be 200 years ago, before it was so easily reproduced. And it's almost like when the Rolling Stones goes on tour. Imagine if filmmakers went on tour with their films, and like, I was here with you tonight, and when I showed you the film, I just didn't show you something that was preordained, but it was something that I was making for you and sensitive to your feelings about it, and so that it was, in a way, live cinema. And that's one possible way that cinema can evolve. And of course, you wouldn't be able to pirate it, and you wouldn't, you would have a DVD, but that would be just like you get a CD at a rock concert just to remember it. And so that's one possible way that the language of cinema can be affected by this new technology and can evolve. But I'm sure there are others as well that you'll think of.
Since Youth Without Youth and Encontro, I've noticed a different approach in writing, with tendency to, I'm not going to say the supernatural, but the superhuman, and with a big emphasis on language and the use of language and the way we deal with language. It was very clear in Youth Without Youth, but in this movie, I think it's more subtle. Was this a shift in your way of writing, in your imagination? What happened?
I think it's partly the fact that I'm not working for a living anymore, and I'm not, you know, like working and trying to have a career or trying to be successful or doing what they tell you the audience wants. And I'm really, you know, I'm making movies more out of the love of it. I don't get paid. I don't want to get paid. I do it because I am so fascinated with cinema itself. It's such a magical form, and you learn so much by practicing in it. And maybe I'm just becoming, you know, when I made those other films, I was about 6 years old. Now I'm about 8 years old, so I'm a little more mature, I think. But thank you. I would like to, you know, did you ever see a movie I made called The Rain People? It's all about a woman. It's very interesting to be made by a, you know, 23-year-old guy, because it's about, in those days, a woman who leaves her husband, not because she doesn't love him, but because she doesn't want to be a wife. And she gets in the car and she drives across the country. I would like to be able to write better women's roles, because I admire women so much.
Do you really think it's the director who is going to be upfront in the future of cinema, or is it the viewer? I mean, like more of the video game? You understand?
You know, I do understand, and I definitely think the future, when I talk about malleable cinema, it means that the film isn't made until, it's a little bit like quantum physics. It doesn't exist until you see it, and that the film will be different each time it's seen. And I believe it will be a kind of interaction between the filmmaker who'll be like the conductor of an opera. In the old days, opera was sort of like cinema, and those great conductors, you know, as you probably know or don't know, Wagner was a conductor, Mahler was a conductor, Richard Strauss was a conductor. They were also composers, but they were known as operatic conductors, and they were the stars. Toscanini, they were the stars, like filmmakers of the day, and they were the when a production was done, they had chosen the singers and rehearsed the orchestra. So it was a little bit like a film. And they would actually be there, and the audience would you know, be filled with emotion, and the conductor would run the show. And if there was an aria that was fantastic, the audience wanted it, the conductor would have them do it again, or something like that. So I think it will be the interaction between the viewer and the conductor. I've been thinking a lot about that recently, how, other than, did anyone ever see the production of Napoleon by Abel Gance with the orchestra? That was a spectacular evening. 3 screens, a symphony orchestra, a great movie, a masterpiece by Abel Gance, and a conductor, and it was magic what happened between the audience and the cinema. So in a way, that was live cinema, even though it was filmed, you know, it came alive with the combination of the music, the audience, the conductor. But your question is good. It's, I think, some sort of magical connection between the audience and someone. It's like a disc jockey, like the disc jockey on the highest level, where he's up there and people are enjoying it, and he's just pulling not only the selections of the music out of his files, but the way he treats them, what kind of treatment or equalization.